or people at the top with me. To me, everything was positive. It was all going the right way. I had a beautiful sports car now, like really young to have everything I had. I was like, man, I'm crushing it. And that's all I could think about. Now, what I didn't know was the real estate crash that was about to happen.
Welcome to another edition of Living Boldly with Purpose, and I'm Dr. B. I am your host, and oh my gosh, I'm excited today. A couple of reasons I'm excited. First, that it is my birthday, and I am, oh my gosh, how old am I? I am 60 years old, and so I was just telling Alex here a moment ago that I'm just excited about what the rest of my life holds and all the things that I've been able to accomplish and do. Sometimes I like talking about them. Most times I'm just like, hey, I got to move forward, the past. And I don't know if you have any friends like this, but sometimes our friends just get stuck in the past. And all they want to talk to me is about, oh my gosh, this is what happened. Remember this? And we relive. Well, it's been 40 years since I've been in college, well, almost 40 years since I started college. And I remember the stories, and it was a pivotal time of my life, but I don't want to keep talking about that. I want to talk about where we're going and how we're going to get there and all the things that life and the opportunities that are there. And so just so excited about that being my portion of my life. And, my grandkids have been, calling me today, and that's always cool, because, I have this 3-year-old who's here now, and we had to go buy candles this morning for my cake. And, she's in the story. It is just so fun. She's the same kid who yesterday, I'm pulling her to the mailbox on her little scooter thing. And she stops and literally puts her foot on the ground and says, she goes, "Papa, I got this." And I know she's going to fall over. I know that she doesn't know how to ride a scooter yet. But, it's just so fun, to see life through the eyes of the kid, and here I am where, I'm thinking about retirement and I'm supposed to be thinking about retirement. I don't know if I even believe in retirement because there's so many things that I want to do. Like last year, I wrote 2 books. And then I want to write, I've already started the 3rd one for this year. And I'm just, oh my gosh, all the wonderful things. So that's number 1 reason I'm excited. Number 2, I'm excited because I am on this platform that's called PodMatch. And the CEO, owner, founder decided somehow to let me talk to him today. And so I get to talk to Alex, and I get to find out about this incredible platform because I think everybody who is in business that wants to grow their business should have a podcast. Everybody. Because there's so many benefits from being able, whether it's a once a week or once a day or once every month, everybody should have one because not only does it improve your ability to communicate, which is super important, it improves your ability, to get clients, to get leads, to do all those wonderful things. And I just found so much joy in it and being able to connect with the platform that you have. And so I want to talk about the platform and stuff. But first, Alex, I want to hear your story because I want to hear where you came from and what you've done in your life and why you were able to come up with this idea that is, I think, revolutionizing, podcasting and how we can connect and allowing people like myself who just are, haven't had this platform. I wanted to be in radio when I was, a young kid, and I'm a broadcasting major, and and that was what I wanted to do. But then, and I have a cousin who's like in the Radio Hall of Fame and all that kind of stuff, and I had a talk show and I did all that kind of stuff. But it was above what I could do at the time and how expensive it would be to do it. And so this gives me the opportunity to live the life that I wanted to. So without more talking about me, I want to talk about you. So Alex, please tell us your story, and then we'll just kind of chop it up after that.
Yeah, Dr. B, first off, thank you for having me. Like, seriously, the honor is all mine. You do an incredible job. I was telling you before we started, but I've been listening to your podcast today. So I felt like now being here is just a continuation of what my day already was. And you bring so much energy, so much joy. Happy birthday. Thank you for trusting me with time on your birthday. And actually, thank you to your family as well. Really, really means a lot to be here. So to jump into my story, I thought about like kind of where to start this. And it's a little bit of a cheat to listen to a podcast before you go on it, because you kind of like know some of the bases, right? But I was really thinking about it, and I thought that for me, my life has been my work have been very connected throughout most of my life. And for me, I have very good work-life balance. I haven't always, and I'll share a little bit about that. But I thought that kind of following my entrepreneurial journey along the way would kind of be a good way to start this thing and to kind of go through that. So, and again, because my life, my work have always been really connected, and in more recent years, that's been healthy. Hasn't always been, but when I first got started, my first ever like aha moment came at 10 years old. And I was like an odd 10-year-old kid. Like I was very self-aware. I never beat myself up, but I realized that I have 3 younger brothers and had a lot of friends in the neighborhood, but I wasn't good at sports like most of them were. But I also wasn't good at video games like they were. So I was like, okay, that sucks, right? Like all 3 of my brothers were musicians and really talented. And also like I wasn't good in school. And so like as a 10-year-old kid, it was a weird spot to be, having the self-awareness to realize like, oh, I'm actually not good at anything, right? Like, and I was always a kid who tried a lot. And again, I was not beating myself up. I don't think I had any sort of complex. I just realized, okay, I haven't found my thing yet. And I'll never forget it. One day, I was driving home from who knows where, but my dad, my dad was driving. I was in the passenger seat. And this was the early 90s when you could sit in the front seat. So I'm like looking at some kids on the side of the road, and they're selling lemonade. I was like, Dad, what are they doing? He's like, oh, they're selling lemonade. I'm like, 25 cents. So I was like, could we do that? And he's like, oh yeah, my dad's an entrepreneur. So he's like, absolutely, son. Like he goes, I'll get you everything. So we went to the store, we got everything. And I remember sitting there selling some lemonade, and my brothers and one friend that decided to join us in this venture, there was like 4 of us, I guess. They're all like, man, we all made like $2 each. And in my head though, I'm going back to the grocery store visit, realizing this isn't profitable. And the rest of them are like, huh? Like, what do you mean profit? And I was like, well, this costs more money to do than we're making. If it wasn't for our parents, this wouldn't work. And they were still just like, what are you talking about? Right? Like, and so again, Dr. B, odd 10-year-old kid, right? Like when you said, well, I just remember like we were next to the golf course, because there was a golf course across the street from the neighborhood, and that's like where we were doing this. I can remember like watching golfer after golfer yell profanity because they're hitting every ball in the water, getting angry. And so here I am, zero profit business, right? Like selling stuff. And I'm like, man, like, wonder if we could get those golf balls out of the lake. I wonder if they want them back. You know, like they get real angry when they hit one in the water. I didn't really understand the game of golf, but I'm like, I wonder if they would want those back. And so one day I went out there and I found a golf ball. And what do you know? The next golfer who rode up on a cart, I didn't have to talk to them. They just asked me, hey, what does that golf ball say on it, kid? I was like, Titleist Pro V1. He's like, I'll give you $3 for it.
No.
Yeah, done deal. Easy transaction. Now in my head, again, I wasn't fully developed, but I'm like 100% profit margin, right? Like
nothing.
Cost me nothing other than time. Now I realize there's value in time, right?
Yeah.
But that was the first time I started. Like I grabbed my brothers and some of the kids in the neighborhood. I'm like, hey, if we can fish these golf balls out of the lakes and out of the marsh around here on Saturday morning, we can clean them up and we can sell them right here. Let's try it. And me and the other guys there, like we just kind of built we built a little business, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for each of us to make about $100 on a Saturday morning. It was like right around that amount. And so there was 4 of us doing this, or maybe 5, but we had a system. We go out on Tuesday and Thursday nights, we clean them on Fridays, and then Saturday we'd sell them, type of thing. We had them organized, and they looked to me to lead it. And I wasn't necessarily the oldest kid out there. It was just that like, hey, Alex seems to get how this whole thing works. And long story short, that was my first time where I felt like I found what I'm good at and what makes me feel alive, right? Like I was like, this is cool. And so for me, like that was a real big moment. I know it came in an awkward age, 10, right? And but the next 2 years, you can only get away with selling people back golf balls with their initials on it for a couple of years until you're not cute anymore, right? I'm like, kid, give me my golf ball. But for 2 years, we just kind of did that business. I'll tell you what, for me, that like set me into this cycle of like, I like this stuff. This is making me feel alive. I got to lead people. I got to like do all this stuff. And so from then on, I just started other little things along the way. But that was kind of how I got my start as an entrepreneur. And I don't know. I've said a lot there, Dr. B. I don't know if you want to pitch anything in there before I keep on going, or I'll just keep on
No,
moving.
just keep going. I love it. I love it.
Cool. All right, cool. So after that, I started, again, this is like, I don't know the exact years here. They get blurry. And Dr. B, like, happy birthday again. I don't know if they get more blurry or less blurry over time, but for me, I'm like, okay, what year was it? I can't recall the year, everybody. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
but
well,
what's important, it's around the time that eBay became a thing. I remember seeing my dad buy something on it. It was an auction. He was like bidding at the last seconds before you could schedule a bid and like all the things you can do now. Back then, like you had to stay up late. I can remember going to bed. My dad was never on the computer, but he's on the computer. Refresh on eBay, because that's what you had to do to see the timer move down. Like, what are you doing? And he showed me. And man, I instantly was like, well, if we stay up 4 hours later and there's another one of these, we'd get it for cheaper because no one's going to be up in 4 hours from now. And he's like, oh, that's a good point. Anyway, long story short, my dad's like, here's my eBay account. He's like, you have to pay me back for anything you buy. But I started buying and flipping things. And for me, being a young kid at 12 to 14 years old at this point, I was buying action figures and I was buying Legos and I was buying all like the cool things that like you couldn't find in stores anymore. And I was able to like buy a whole lot of them, like, 50 different action figures, something like that, pull out the 3 that I want and then sell them back and usually make a profit, because I was like, oh, I'm going to post it in the middle of the day when people can actually bid, not in the middle of the night, right? When you're home from work, like do it when they're doing it. So, so little things like that just kind of spiraled. And I learned to get really good on a computer happened during that time. So like I learned to understand computers, the way people kind of think. And my dad actually introduced me to someone who was doing a technology startup. And at this point I was now, maybe I had just turned 16. And my dad introduced me to this guy and he's like, hey, my son's really good on computers. You're doing a technology startup. Like maybe there's something there. So I met with this much older gentleman who was building out software to create virtual tours of homes. Now it's more common. It's where you kind of drag the mouse. So you can like look at the roof, look at the floor, like spin all the way around, right? Like it's more common now, but going back then, we were the pioneers of the software that did that. And he's like, I need help. He's like, I'm in over my head. I'm good at the photography side. I'm good at the business side, but like I need the tech, right? And so together we just started building virtual tours of home. We figured out how to build technology to stitch it, to how to post it to the MLS. And so we just took off with this thing. So my side of the business was I managed the photographers and the editors. And he was doing kind of like the lead generation and stuff like that for the business. Was this other person who was actually an adult, me being a younger kid, right? But this was my first like legitimate business because I was paying taxes. I had staff, like I had,
oh, really?
Yeah, all that stuff. And so at one point I had 7 people working for me between editors and photographers. And I learned to manage people. And back then the tool set was different, but it was a fully remote company, which is like wild to think about. Like this is maybe early 2000s now I'm talking. And like it was fully remote. We used, I don't know if you remember this, but AIM, AIM, AOL Instant Messenger. Like that's how we communicated. We had like little groups and we just
was this dial-up? I mean, were you?
No. This was, thankfully we were past that point. We're DSL. I think was, yeah, it was DSL. I did grow up with dial-up and went to DSL, and it was anyway. So we were just chatting there and making it happen, and that actually did really well. And moving up till I was 18 years old, I just kind of fell in love with the idea of real estate. Like, yeah, I was doing like the tech side, but like I saw all of the homes and I might not have been in them physically, but I was regularly asking photographers, I'm like, hey, do you think they added that bathroom later? And like, why did they have this in the backyard? And like, what was that? I was just very curious. So when I kind of came of age, 18, I decided to invest in real estate. And I was like, man, I want to not just do the tech side. I want to have rental properties, buy and hold. I want to get into that. And so 18 years old, I bought my first property. And thankfully I had saved up enough where I didn't need a cosign or anything like that. It was actually like, I was able to do this, right? And I was really excited about it. Wow. Moved a renter right in and was extremely profitable. And the property value this time was climbing really fast. And so fast forward a couple years, I'll never forget this, Dr. B. I was in I believe it was a dental office. And on the table, they had a magazine, and it was Forbes. And on it said Forbes 30 under 30. And so I was 20 years old now. So I don't know, between 18 and 20, I feel like the mindset of a young man changes quite a bit because you're like, I'm not a teenager anymore, right? Like I'm basically an adult. A lot to learn, but basically legally an adult, right? Mm-hmm. And so I saw this magazine, like, and this is back before smartphones were really like what you do in a waiting room. So there's magazines. So I open it up. I'm like 30 under 30, man. Like these are the people that are making it, right? Like young people that are like leading the way. And at that point, I just committed to myself. I'm like, I'm going to be a Forbes 30 under 30 and real estate is going to be my avenue. That is going to be how I get there. That is my lane. I'm going to be the guy. And like walked out with a beautiful smile and ready to go, right? Like at that dental office, I was like, I'm ready. And so I really didn't have a lot in that life to put my my identity in at that point. Like I was brought up well, and I'm very thankful. I have a great family still to this day. But when I became like living on my own at this point, like all that, like I didn't know who I was. And so I wrapped myself up in my work. And when you wrap yourself up in your work, it's really easy to start getting around the wrong people and the wrong things. Now, I wasn't like partying. There was no like drugs involved, nothing like that. But what was happening is this internal sense of greed and pride and even arrogance of like, hey, I'm going to be this Forbes 30 under 30. I got to have high, like people at the top with me, right? That got me into the wrong type of relationship with a girl. It got me around the wrong type of friendships where we were just really money centric and really not a lot of value being driven or anything like that. And so I didn't know any of this. To me, everything was positive. It was all going the right way. I had a beautiful sports car now, like really young to have everything I had, right? Like I was like, man, I'm crushing it. And that's all I could think about. Now, what I didn't know was the real estate crash that was about to happen.
Exactly.
You knew what was coming out. You're like, uh-oh, I know where this story goes.
Yeah, I knew it coming. I wait for it.
You're just over here like, oh man, I'm the edge. So listen, like hindsight's 2020. Like if I go back, I'm like, oh, how could I have not seen that? And the reality is I beat myself up for years over that. I really did. But back to the story here, when that happened, my business was in real estate. So the software side was all I did was invest in property. Like, so everything I had that was really valuable and doing well literally crashed and burned. Yeah. I didn't sell that business. I just gave it to the partner because we went from doing 30 homes a day to 1 a week. It was like, I had to let everyone go. So I'm like, all right, I'll do all the work. Like, and then it got to the point where I'm like, hey, just take it. Like there's nothing here. And I ended up moving into a rental property that I never had any intent on moving into. And I felt stuck there. And here's the other thing. And this is what happens when you like kind of are like a shallow individual. And I don't mean to sound mean saying that, but the people you're with, that's who they are. And so like when people could tell that, okay, Alex isn't doing well anymore, I don't really care about how he feels, any of that, right? Like the relationship disappears, right? Like she's gone. The people that are quote unquote friends are like, we're friends in good times, not in bad times. We're out of here, right? And man, I found myself alone for the first time in my life. I not only felt alone, I was alone, like truly was alone. I had really pushed my good upbringing aside. I had focused too much on the business. I was completely out of balance. And my dreams of what I wrapped my identity into, which was becoming this Forbes 30 under 30, it was gone.
Yeah.
It wasn't there anymore. Like that there was no realistic way for me to get out of this hole within the next 10 years. And the reality is there wasn't. Like, so spoiler, like I never got out of that. It took me 10 years to break out of that. So, and it wasn't like all terrible for my 20s, but man, at that point, I just remember I was like, it's like rock bottom. It was, it was rock bottom. That was the lowest of the low in my life. And I don't think there could be another point like that. And the humbling part of it all is I called my dad during this time. I was like, hey man, like he'd been an entrepreneur for many years. I'm like, how's he was in aerospace. I'm like, is the aerospace industry doing okay? He's like, yeah, in some sectors. He goes, depends on where you're at. And I was like, well, do you think you can get me a job somewhere? I just need something stable. And he's like, no, but I can get you an interview somewhere. I was like, that's my dad right there. You know, like there he is.
Oh my gosh.
A great dad. Right? Always push me. And the reality is, and anything I got in aerospace, I will just be real, was because of my last name. Sanfilippo has a reputation in the space. And so, and that's not because of me, it's because of my dad. And so I acknowledge that. So I got an interview, got a job. The job I got was a part-time receiving clerk at a parts manufacturing company. So we were building aircraft parts, but for me, my job was breaking down boxes and taking out the trash.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That's what receiving clerk meant part-time, was just like, hey man, you're just, and listen, humble beginnings is great. This did not help my defeated mindset. I was already,
your identity
right? Like
crazy right now.
Sports car guy, rolling up to work to take out your trash, right? Like, and it was, man, it was, again, this just like, it was like gasoline on the fire. That was my life. Like just going the wrong direction, man. And like, so for me, this was the bad time. And I went home every day just expecting more bills. And there was a situation that changed my life. And that's like what I'll get into real quick here. For me, I was like looking at the mail, always bills. And I'm a very organized guy. So I don't just like leave a stack of things. Like I finish the mail as it comes in and I throw it away. But there was one thing there, and it was a flyer for like a young adults church ministry. And I like looked at it for a minute. I was brought up in church, hadn't been in a long time, but I was like looking at it and I was like, oh, the address, it's probably walking distance from where I live. It's got to be like right across the street, you know, like, and I looked at it and I was like, no. I just put it in the corner of my counter though. Like I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, which is not like me. So I just left it sitting there and walked away from it, sat there for like 3 weeks. And like, finally I just picked up, like, why can't I throw this away? Like, I'm not going to go to this. Like, why? And finally I was just like, you know what? I'm going to go. Then I can throw it away. Like I'm going to go. But for me, like I end up getting to this spot. And at this point I had felt very like rejected in my life, which was all internal. That was my own doing. But I remember like sitting in the car thinking to myself, like, man, I can't walk in here. The people that are here are not going to like me. They're going to treat me just like everyone else when they realize how much of a failure I am. Right. Like this is not a good place to go. And I really didn't take my faith seriously. Like, I mean, I was just maybe I was a religious person as a kid and like nothing as an adult. My God doesn't want me. Like, I know that. I couldn't swing it, man. Like, so I walk in and, to my surprise, man, like I don't know how to describe what happened next, but I just felt loved. And, for me, man, that was a feeling like I just didn't know at that time in my life. I felt like everything that I thought was love was not. And like, that was the first, I can't describe it other than a feeling. And like, so, yeah, and I get that not everyone who listens is like a person of faith or someone who follows Jesus, but man, like I devoted my life to it that moment. And like that was it for me. Like I knew like, hey, this is the new foundation of my life. And so for me, if I can share like this whole story I've shared, kind of like building up and then getting dropped to the rock bottom, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I would have never ended up there and finding this new foundation and purpose in life. Since that time, everything I have done, everything I've built has been on that foundation of my faith. And I've never been like in ministry or anything like that, really. Like I've done some volunteer work and all, but like, so I've always been like an entrepreneur or a business guy. And but that right there, man, that was the point. And to kind of keep that
God
going,
showed up. He showed up right when you needed it, right? Oh
It really
God.
did, man.
Cool.
It makes me cry every time I share the story. And like, I try to, maybe I shouldn't hold it back, but like even here, like my eyes are all teary, but like, I can't describe like the feeling. And I found some friends that really cared. I found faith that was like, just, man, changed things for me. So from then on, I committed to being the best I could at anything I did. And not to prove anything to me, not to make it back to that Forbes 30 to 30, because like, you know what, this is the identity of who I am. It's to love and serve people. And so, man, like I went back to the aerospace job that next day. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to be the best person at breaking down boxes and taking out trash this company's ever seen. Right. Like this energy. And, but I started actually using the brain that God gave me, which was like a unique entrepreneurial mind ever since I was a kid. And so I decided like, hey, this trash can's always full. This one's always empty. Put a bigger trash can here, remove this one. And like, let's use space for something else. Hey, we break down boxes in like 3 different parts of this business. We're going to put carts there. We'll have everyone loaded there, and we'll wheel everything to the same central location. We'll break it down there. And this was me with other people doing this. And that was noticed by people much higher up. We're like, who's got the initiative in this department? Like, who is that person who's like taking this seriously? Right. And so I went from part-time to full-time, and I ended up being in that career for 15 years. And I went from that part-time guy. When I left, I was actually, it's actually interesting. It was a privately owned mid-sized company. When I left, it was a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar organization. And so like it like did a lot. And that wasn't because of me. That's just the nature of aerospace. Like it became like a big manufacturer. And anyway, but like when I left, I had worked my way up through I feel like all the departments. And I kept on getting promoted. Even when like new management come in, when it went public, they had new CEOs come in, and people were like, "This guy's done like everything here. Keep on moving him up, because he's got like when he's in a meeting, when Alex is in a meeting, he can tell you how it's going to affect each department because he's been in them all." And so for me, that was actually like a big blessing. I ended up being the youngest guy in the C-suite, probably to date. I haven't been there in a long time, but like to date, I'm sure. I think I was 28 when I hit like the C-suite level, and I can just remember everyone else had white hair or no hair. And I was like, man, all right. Like I was terrified, but I'll tell you what, I love that career, man. It was just an absolute blast. And I gave it my all. And I always say I gave my all for God, just went out there and did my best. And so that was like my 15-year career. And ultimately I knew I wanted to get back to entrepreneurship. And when it went public and I helped with that whole acquisition and that whole building process, I kind of knew that like the value I could add was done. It was time for that next generation to be brought up. And so I kind of made room, and that's what ultimately got me into podcasting. So I started a podcast to kind of learn how to be an entrepreneur. So I just started podcasting about it, and I realized I wanted to be in podcasting. Like I like this, and ultimately brought me back to software. So I started PodMatch.com, which is a software that connects podcast guests and hosts for interviews. I always tell people it works kind of like a dating app, but instead of connecting for dates, connects for podcast interviews. And launched that in 2020. And on that same year, it was actually December 7th, 2020 was my last day in corporate. And I started pursuing it full time. I'll tell you what, that was a terrifying moment for me. And that's kind of where I'll land this thing here. I was so nervous to leave that corporate job. Like, you get comfortable after 15 years, right? Like, there's perks, there's benefits, there's things that you no longer know how to do because people do it for you, right? Like, there's all that. That was like, oh man, am I really going to like risk it all? And so the way I finally articulate to myself and got myself to take this leap was, I'm sacrificing the good for the sake of the potential great. The aerospace company I was at, that was good. Great could be me back in my natural habitat of entrepreneurship, right? Like doing something that felt really purpose driven, something like I was supposed to do. And so it was a calculated risk. I definitely like looked at numbers to see, is this possible? And ultimately what happened is I had to remind myself that courage means being afraid than doing what you have to do anyway. And I was afraid, but I was like, I'm just gonna have to do this. I owe it to myself to try it. And I called my dad right before I made this decision. He was the guy who got me into aerospace. I'd been there all the time. I was like, maybe I'll ask him about leaving. And it was so funny. I asked him, and I was like, hey, and I was nervous to even tell him. Like, it didn't matter to him. But I was like, hey, like, kind of got me in this space. I'm like, but I think I want to do an entrepreneurial thing. I've got an idea that's making money already. Like, not as much I'm making aerospace, but like, what do you think? And he just goes, dude, heck yes. He's like, it's the best time ever to do it. He's like, dude, do it. And my dad talks like that. He's like, dude, do it. That's what he said. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I got off the phone, and sure enough, end up making it happen. Left over a 90-day period of time. Being at that level, they asked for 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of like phase myself out. But since then, I've been full-time in podcasting from the software perspective with PodMatch, and just being behind the microphone. And man, like right now, I believe I'm doing what I was put on earth to do. And I don't know how else to describe it. Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life and my time. And yeah, there's tough moments, of course, right? There's days where I maybe don't feel like doing it, but man, it is overall a joy, a privilege, and an honor. And man, that kind of brings us to present day.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, because it just, I got all these questions in my mind right now, and all these things that, like when you're, going through the things, and I didn't hear college in there. So did you, which,
I started. I should.
okay.
I started, but when the economy wrecked, I actually couldn't afford it anymore. So I had to stop. I wasn't getting good grades either. So I was like, man, I'm spending a ton of money now. I don't have that money. Like I can't. So I never end up going back. I don't know. It terrifies me to this day.
No, well, which is so cool, because one of the things that, what I think is part of your story is, sometimes when we go to college, if we do it correctly, what I think is correctly is it's all about creating relationships, right? And having a group of people to do it with, and making sure it's definitely not about the curriculum, because the stuff that you learn, is gone 10 years later anyways. But if you can do those relationships, but when you went through your hard time, you didn't have those relationships that that would have been built in college. You had the folks that were kind of like, I guess, on your coattails from the real estate business that were trying to ride it. So that almost made it even a deeper hole for your identity, because your identity was shaped around what you were doing, maybe not who you are. Am I correct in that? Or
100%. Yeah. I mean, listen, I guess I didn't have the opportunity. I didn't put myself in the right position to make good friends. And that, you're absolutely right. Like, the relationships you build through school, through any sort of groups, like I ended up getting into like different church small groups. So I got into, and I built some great relationships there. But like, that's key. Because I mean, there's people I know. Like I had an entrepreneur I interviewed last week, and it's been 30 years, and he still talks about the contacts that he made in college that are still working together. So you're 100% right.
Yeah, no, and so then I see it. So then I see where church comes in, and your faith, and that kind of stuff. And so, my quick question on that is, now that became your foundation, has that been like every part of anything that you do, and how you do it, and go back? I mean, how has your faith been, instrumental in growing a big company?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, by the way. It's a gift to be able to answer something like this. I can't say I always get it right. So let me put that there, right? Like,
none of us do.
Right, of course. I do my best with that. Yes. And so for me, like, I guess the most practical way to put it is core values, right? To have like actual core values. And so for me, I kind of like make sure those align with my faith and what I believe. And then I kind of let those go from my personal life into my business life. And so that's kind of how I really do like the whole thing, if you will. So yeah, like for me, even on the PodMatch about page. Like it's going to, if you read the core values section, it's very clear that like we love people and we serve people, and everything we do is aligned with that first and foremost. And like one of my personal core values is I wear shirts that say my core values, by the way. I'm wearing one right now that says the words lead with value. And for me, like I always make sure anything I do, it leads with value first. Like, yes, Alex, you can make a profit, but not unless it really, really serves someone first. And that's why we've been very bullish about our money back guarantee. People join PodMatch and sometimes it just doesn't work for people. Like maybe they have something too unique, too niche, or it's just not what they're looking for. We are very quick to make sure you get 100% of your money back. We're going to cover the cost of fees. We're going to get back to you as fast as possible, because that's not leading with value if we get your money before it serves you. And so like we take it down to extreme levels. Some people say too extreme, but like for me, I sleep better at night knowing I'm doing the right thing.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool. Well, when I think about, leading or living boldly with purpose and leading at the same time, I don't know if you can do that without serving others. I keep trying to question it. And as I talk to some people, it's like, can you live, boldly and have your purpose be met without serving others? And I don't think it's possible. So when you're in the aerospace world and you're doing your 15 years there and you're moving up, and I was so glad you didn't say I was still cutting boxes and open them up after 15 years.
In some ways, though, that was the most fun job I had there. Once I got my mindset right, but no, I didn't. It wasn't. It was short lived. But occasionally, I can remember walking through as like a C-suite guy, and I've got people follow me, and I'd see someone breaking down boxes, and I'm like, man, I want to grab a knife so bad and cut some boxes open.
Oh my god! I bet. Oh my gosh. So are you thinking about your purpose while you're doing that? Are you believing because you're probably in purpose for that time in your life as you're moving up and moving, but were you still thinking there was something more and I just don't know how to access it, or the technology didn't jump on you quite yet to say this is what we do? Or how did that whole progress there where you're going, okay, I'm here long enough, but this is what I really want to do?
Yeah, for a long time, I felt like I shouldn't say, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. So I didn't have that, like, oh, I need to get out of this. Like that wasn't there for a long time, which I think was healthy. It was good.
Mm-hmm.
I gave it all while I was there. It wasn't until probably year 13. And there was actually a specific situation that happened there that kind of made me realize my time was coming to an end. And one of my divisions I was overseeing had saved 10% or more, like on a profit margin on something we did. It was a huge job. Like it was really big. And I was excited. I reported directly to the CEO. So I was excited to tell the CEO, like, this is big money we just like made and saved. And like, we did a really great job. And so I wanted to go brag on my team. So I sit down, I'm like, hey, did you see the numbers in this department? And he goes, yeah, I saw them. And he said it like that. I was like, oh, well, you realize that we like made an extra 10%. He goes, no, I know. And I just kept putting my hands up. I'm like, well, is everything all right? And he goes, no, not everything's all right. He goes, we're a public company now, man. He's like, you can't do big moves like that without telling the shareholders and the people selling stocks. He's like, they need to know when you're going to rock the boat like that, because we could have been making a lot more money from the external team as well. And so anyway, it turned into this thing where he's like, I'm not mad. He's like, just don't do that again. And like, so, and here's the thing, like when you hit that level, I get that it needs to have more red tape and that's kind of how it works.
Mm-hmm.
But when I left his office that day, I shut the door and I was walking back down the hall to my office, which really wasn't far from his, but it felt like a really long walk that day. And that was the day I realized, like, you know what? This is not, like, I love it here. I'm still going to give it my all, but this is not going to be for me forever. And that was kind of when I had that shift in my mind of like, hey, I think it's time to move on. And an important note here, though, is my performance didn't tank. As a matter of fact, my last 2 years of that company were absolutely my best, especially the last year. Even when I knew I was leaving, I believe the way you end one season is the way you start the next. You end on the same foot you begin on. I did not want to leave by screwing over a company that had treated me well or that I had built a legacy with. And even since then, I've been invited back 3 separate times to speak to the organization, which is really cool. I believe that, you know what, I'm going to do my best here. But the Dr. B, the thing that you're talking about happened, I'd say, at year 13. And by the year 15 is when I finally actually did leave.
Gotcha. Oh man, that makes so much sense. I mean, because when you have that, with that brain that this is, you're realizing, yeah, no, this isn't my company. This is somebody else's company. I can't do all those things that you truly want to do. And then you get to go start another company. Now, what's kind of cool about, what I'm thinking, with PodMatch and what you're doing with PodMatch, I think I was reading, somewhere where you're almost up to the point where you've given out almost $1 million, in I guess, the revenue, I guess, to us podcasters who are out there doing it. And what a neat way to give back and help people. That you created something that not only could provide for you and your family and the business, or not even employees, right? I'm sure you have tons of employees that, continue to do, but you can give to the actual entrepreneur, first person who's getting going and starting. Where did that come in your thought process that not only am I going to help the people that are part of our company, but I'm going to figure out how to help people, I guess, live their dreams or have an avenue, to be able to live their dreams, which is so incredibly cool.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. This is I was excited about this. So here's how this happened. It actually ties back to another core value of mine. Again, kind of everything goes to that, which is seek to serve.
Okay.
So I always make sure, like in anything I'm doing, I'm seeking to serve. And I'll never forget, we're about a year, maybe a year and a half into PodMatch. It was probably a year and a half. And I realized this is when we started getting some analytics going. Like we're still like ramping things up. We finally had a logo, right? Like the things were starting to move. And then so we got some analytics and I started looking, I'm like, hey, I told my co-founder, Jesse, and my other co-founder, Alicia, I was like, hey, like I think we have a problem. I'm like, podcasters are leaving. I'm like, guests are staying, but podcast hosts are leaving. Like this thing must not be working. And I was like, but hold on, let's not jump to conclusions. Let me start getting on phone calls with them. So we basically, when someone was leaving, we'd say, click here, delete your account. Right after we'd say, hey, will you get on a phone call with Alex for 10 minutes and just tell him why? And so we did that. And I remember one day, Dr. B, I don't recommend this. I talked to 25 people in one day. Never again. I got to like 23. I'm like, this is a mistake.
You made it home.
Right? Man, that was a terrible idea. But okay, I learned a lot. And the thing is, there was, of course, the percentage of people that were like, hey, it just didn't work, or I hated it, right? Like, and that's fine. There are people that say that. But the mass majority was over 90% of people, because we were documenting every single call, said, I'm not leaving PodMatch. I'm just quitting my podcast completely.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, why? And for many of them, there was the reason like, oh, I started and like, I actually don't like talking, so it's like, okay, maybe you shouldn't podcast, right? Fair enough. You're not like Alex or Dr. B in that case, but but some were saying, hey, like my spouse, my significant other, my family, they can't come to terms with the fact that it is eating into our monthly living budget. Like it has a cost associated with it. And it's not feasible right now with where we're at. So I'm stopping because I really can't afford it. And so, and even if it wasn't a lot of money, because I started asking people, and they're like, well, how much are you spending? And they're like, oh, like $35 a month. And for some people that's a make or break deal. Right. And like, I totally get that and respect that. And I'm like, oh man, like that sucks. Like there's nothing anyone can do about that. Right. Like go get another job and then have a podcast as well. Right. Like that doesn't work. And so when I approached Alicia and Jesse, I was like, okay, we don't have a problem. The industry has a problem. Can we help with this? How can we serve people? Like, what can we do to serve these individuals? Mm-hmm. And so what we end up doing is we launched what we call our Pod Value Initiative, which is basically and I'll just fully transparently say here, we cut our profit in half. So we just basically say, here's our profit. We cut it in half. 50% of that goes back to podcast hosts. We split it among anyone who's doing interviews on our platform. And because that can vary quite a bit, right? Some days it's pennies on the dollar. Other days, like it can be a lot more than that. And we're always doing our best to raise that number. Basically, people who use PodMatch, their podcast host, they earn a little bit along the way. And our goal is, listen, I'd love to get everyone rich, but like, it just doesn't work like that, right? Like it's not an expensive product. So, but our goal is to help podcasters offset their production costs. Can we put $30 or $40 back into their pockets every month so they can say, I'm using PodMatch and these other 5 tools and I'm breaking even? Because then their family says, okay, you're making $2 a month doing this. Sure, keep it up. Like that's a great hobby that doesn't cost you anything, right? And so we just started doing that. And to your point, the goal in 2025 is to break $1 million we've put back in the hands of podcasters. And to me, I'm very, very passionate about doing that because I want to serve podcasters. And with the profit that we keep, most of it gets reinvested back to the platform because once again, we believe in the platform and where it's going. And we know if we can continue to build and grow how it serves both podcast guest and host, it can really be something that helps people build a legacy for themselves and the people that they're serving through their listenership.
Oh, and what's so cool about it, and at least for me in my entrepreneur mind and world and things that I do, is it gives an avenue that I can make money right away at something I'm enjoying doing. And there's so many things that we try that, especially for the entrepreneur, right, that are the beginning one who's trying everything. It's like, can I just do something and make $1? There's times when I was doing like multi-level marketing and, whether it was Amway back in the 90s or whatever, like, can I make $1, just trying to sell some soap or something? Because then if I can make $1, then I know I can make 2. If I can make 2, I know I can make 100. And so, I'm doing my podcast and I'm loving it, and I'm loving every minute of it. And I do a podcast. Somebody asked me to come on their podcast, and it's somebody who's part of PodMatch. And he says to me, he goes, there's a thing called PodMatch, that you might want to get on, and you could probably have more guests. And so I'm thinking, oh wow, I can find more people that are in the niche that I'm trying to do, and so I get on there, and then like a couple weeks later, I make like $60, and I'm like the most excited. I'm running around telling my wife, my kids, and my grandkids, I made $60 podcasting. Thinking, okay, this is the beginning of the ability to create revenue. And like you said, I'm not going to be a millionaire, or if I'm trying to be a millionaire, on your platform, doing it on your platform, but your platform can allow me to be one, because there's so many different ways to monetize, podcasting and be in this, this space where, teaching and learning. And so many good things. What are some of the other, I guess, things that as a platform that you learned that are helping the folks that are part of PodMatch? Because I've been interviewing some guests now that just want to be guests, right? They want to talk about a book. Like I did a lady yesterday who just wanted to talk about the book. And I'm like, well, my podcast has this format, we can talk. And so, but I let her, I let her, talk about her book, and then I asked all the questions, and then she went into the, deep dive of her stuff, which is really cool. But what are some of those other things that PodMatch is doing to help us? Because
I'll give the overall goal first off.
Okay.
At the end of the day, and it's something you said earlier in our like when we were starting the conversation, you talked about like one of the values of podcasting as a guest or as a host is it increases your ability to communicate well.
Yes.
And that's something you mentioned earlier. In my mind, listen, everything else in podcasting, including making money or selling your books through guesting, all that is a bonus. Your ability to communicate improving is huge. And I don't know if you've had this moment happen, Dr. B, but for me, there have been times when I've been somewhere and just talking to a group of people, and someone randomly will be like, "You're extremely well spoken." And the reality is, I didn't go to school for that or anything like that. And the reality is, all I've done is gotten reps through podcasting. I've had people ask me questions that like no one else has ever even thought to ask. And you're like, well, we're live. I better figure out how to answer that, right? Like, but what that does inside of you, man, that is a gift for you, the person getting asked, the person getting to share, right? Like, and here's the thing, impacting someone else's life is always a gift. Like that is a blessing that someone will hear this at some point, watch this at some point, and they will change their direction on something specific because of what was said. Like that is a gift through and through. And if it's only one person ever, like it is worth it for that, right? For us internally, discovering how to share our message in a way that lands with people, a way that connects. At the end of the day, what PodMatch is trying to do is maximize the time spent doing that. The problem in podcasting as a guest or host, about 90% of your time is spent off the microphone and only about 10% spent on the microphone that you like. So like Dr. B, when I leave here today, I'm the guest. So it was about a couple hours of prep for me to be here. For you, there's a lot more work that goes into it before it's considered quote unquote done, right? More time that's usually spent here. And depending on how the show is formatted, because every show is a little bit different, it can be a lot of time. So on PodMatch, we said, how can we flip that around and make it 90% of the time spent adding value, serving listeners by spending time behind the microphone together, and the 10% become the administrative functions. So within PodMatch, to do that, we just started looking at the most tedious parts of this thing. Okay, the scheduling, the back and forth emails, the host having to ask the guests for the pictures. So when you create a PodMatch account, if you're the guest, you're adding your pictures, you're adding your bio, you're adding your links, you're adding your call to action, questions you're ready to be asked, idea for topics, right? Like all these things are getting put in front of the host immediately. So there's no like, okay, Alex, here's 15 things I need from you, right? And then like, we've all had guests off of PodMatch before, and you're sending 5 and 6 emails, like they're just not going to pull through. I guess I'm going to Google, like I'm going to see if I can find it myself. And the flip side is the same thing. If you're the guest, you can see all the information about the host. Like, so for me today, I knew which episodes to listen to. I had an idea of where you want this to go. I knew the value that your listeners would want because PodMatch was able to feed me a lot of the information. So I was able to prep, but in a really intentional way and not take multiple days to do it. I was able to do it in an afternoon and be prepared. That's some of the benefit we've really been doing. I could get real granular on like how, but at a high level, that's what we got going on without making listeners fall asleep.
Yeah, gotcha. Are you using AI to help that process? Is that something
Yeah,
you
we
guys are
started
doing?
using AI in 2020. I always say before it was cool.
Uh-huh.
But we have our own algorithms as well, because the reality of AI is it's only as good as what you feed it.
Of course, yeah.
And so that's why some of the bigger platforms that are kind of scraping the whole online world, right? They can give you really good data, but when a platform itself is using their own internal data and information as kind of like a baseline for it, it can be really bad because it depends on what you feed it. So for us, that's why we have an algorithm in there as well. But the AI is able to read the really robust profiles and figure out the connection. So for like you and me, there's a button in the message thread between that's on PodMatch between me and Dr. B that says, Alex, like click here, and basically says, here's what Dr. B wants. Here's what the listeners are going to want on that show. And here's how I can show up and add the most possible value. Like that information is already there for me. So I just read and memorized that. So I showed up with the right mindset today. That right there just saved me easily 2 to 3 hours of what previously was a lot of work. So that's one way we're using AI. Of course, the matching algorithm and different things like that as well.
Gotcha. And so, like, one of the things that I was thinking of, because it's kind of like, when I heard PodMatch, I'm thinking like a dating app or something like that. Like, so I got
Yeah.
to date the people. But, I'm thinking, so on a dating app, I can go find a wife, and then, then I'm done with the platform forever, right? Because I found my wife, I don't need it again, right? I'm thinking I can find a life here. So instead of finding a wife, I can find a life, because there's always going to be somebody who is wanting to either be interviewed or become a host. And I'd love to think of ways, in my own mind, as I'm doing coaching and putting together, how do I help people be a better host, or how to be, what are some of the things in classes and things that you are giving to the folks that are part of the platform that can help them either be a better guest? I mean, I think part of it is just the algorithm knowing, taking away the 2 or 3 hours of prep. But are there any other things that are special to the platform that can help us be better?
Yeah. So on the platform, yeah, there's a few different like research tools, most of that being AI driven and stuff like that. But beyond the platform itself, we also have like our community side where we have some courses. We have the host one out now. And we have like a bunch of training for guests as well. But I'll focus on the host one real quick. But when I told you earlier, I was like interviewing podcasters for that 10 minutes when they were leaving Podmatch. I did that, and I kept that going. I started talking to also successful podcasters. Long story short, I ended up talking to 1,600 people, which I will now admit is too many. Data redundancy is a real thing. I really only need to talk to maybe 150, but I talked to 1,600. A portion of them were people who had quit podcasting. Another portion of people who were podcasting and doing pretty well, and some were ones that I would say like straight up quote unquote arrived. Like they were crushing it as podcasters. That being the smallest segment. But I wanted to learn what attributed to your success or failure as a podcaster. So out of all those conversations, I was documenting everything. And sadly, this was before AI or generative AI. So I manually went through and kind of figured out like, okay, what are the buckets here? Like, what is everyone saying? And I learned there was 10 main factors for why someone succeeds or fails in podcasting. And so what we decided to do is I built out a course. And so I did a training on it. And I went to, it wasn't just me, because I was not the expert on most of these things. So I found people that were. I'm like, come in here. I need you to talk about this specifically because this is why this happens. So we built out this course ranked in order based off of what causes someone to succeed or fail in podcasting as a host. And then we accompanied a quiz to the beginning of it because it was a lot. So I was like, okay, how do we help people find out just what they need? Like, I don't want everyone just to go through the course. I want people to find out what they need. So we attached a quiz to it. So the quiz you go through will basically, you'll answer a series of questions. And they'll tell you, hey, here's your low points and your high points. We suggest going through the course in this order or skipping these and just focusing on these few things because it's currently your biggest pain point based off the data. Again, we had data to do all this. And so for me, that was like that's my baby. Listen, PodMatch is amazing. Like I've loved it. I love the software side. But if there's like a legacy I leave in podcasting, like this quiz and course, and we're building the one for guests right now. We have all the data in. We talked to even more podcast guests because we just used PodMatch. It was a little easier this time, but we were able to use PodMatch to kind of give us the information just by asking them questions. So that'll be like just over 2,200 people on that one. But the idea, once again, figure out from a data-driven approach how and why people succeed and fail. And so for a while, I was this was a bit out of alignment. I didn't mean for it to be, but I was charging, I don't remember the exact number, but just over $1,200 for that course. And why I say it was out of alignment is I really wanted to help. And in my mind, I was always like, well, if there's no buy-in, people aren't going to take it seriously. And so I kind of did that with some best practices on course creators. I wasn't a course guy. So I was like, oh, everyone says do it. So I'm going to do it. In January this year, actually, we cut off. There's no price tag on it. There's no way to pay for it anymore. It's completely free. And I had some course experts reach out and straight up say, Alex, this is a really bad decision. Like, this is not smart. People aren't going to take it seriously anymore. And I was like, you know what? Like, I don't want to be the one to decide that. Like, I'm going to give them the opportunity to go through it and hope that it helps them. I'm going to do the same thing on the guest side. There's just no price tag because I was like, man, I want to make sure it's going to really help. And it was my way of honoring the industry and just saying like, hey, this is the best of what I know, and other people know, here it is, right? And so that's kind of like how we really help people level up on either side of the microphone. Again, the guesting side, it's not that organized yet, but it's going to be really soon. We're like pretty far along in that process. I'm so excited to have both sides of this thing like really organized. So if someone's like, I want to make it, this is like the roadmap for making that happen.
I'm going to go take it. I haven't taken it yet. So I know, I can't wait to go take it and learn more and grow more. And oh my gosh, what an amazing gift that you're able to give, to the world, to the industry, to folks. When we talk about, to me, communication is the number one skill that all of us should know. And the better communicators we are, the more opportunities we have in life. And so this is a way to do it and to help folks that have been struggling, help folks that are, even if they do, I don't know, 40 podcasts, 50 podcasts, and they don't even put them out there for people to see. They just do them because they get better. Their lives are going to be better. I want to just kind of flip back and pivot a little bit, just because I want to just kind of know from you as I'm watching you and learning from you. What are some of the things that Alex does to stay healthy? You talked about you have a good work-life balance right now, and you got this amazing company that's doing all this work. But I just want to make sure that folks understand, okay, this is what it looks like when you're doing this, when you're working so hard, when you don't get out of whack like all of us seem to do. Maybe there's some tips in there that can help as we go through.
This is like my favorite topic that I never get to talk about. From work-life balance is a really important thing. And I take this very extreme. When I didn't used to, when I was in corporate, I didn't feel like I needed to because I had an office. When we started PodMatch, it was 2020, went full-time with it during that year. So remote was really the only way to do it. And listen, the entire team just kind of likes it. And so we just decided, you know what, again, we're splitting 50% of our profit with hosts that use the platform, right? I was like, we cut that profit a lot if we get an office, like for everybody, right? And I was like, let's just all keep remote. So we decided to stay remote. You have to have some self-discipline in multiple ways to work remote. If you're like me and you maybe come from a family of where being a workaholic is actually a thing in my family, you have to have some borders, some ground rules, right? You have to have some things in place saying these are my boundaries on when I work and when I don't. And so for some people, it's to like start. For me, it's to stop. And so some really practical examples of this is my computer. I cannot log into it before 8 a.m. and I can't log into it after 6 p.m. It's only during those hours I can use it. And people are like, how? Basically, I'm the kid using my computer. My wife has the screen time password and it kicks me off after 6 p.m. And so, I could technically ask her for the password, but she knows, why do you need it? And I'm like, oh, I need to keep on working. She's like, why? Like that's how we kind of have that agreement. And so like a really practical thing is to do that. I do the same thing with my phone. I don't have anything work related on my phone at all. And this is very extreme, I know, but same thing. I have a screen time password on my phone. I'm not even able to access the internet on my phone. So I cannot pull up a browser on my phone, which I have an iPhone, but so it sounds crazy, people, but I purposely blocked it all out because I know myself, because I'll put my email on my phone. Let me just check this one thing on this one website, right? Like I know myself. And so I just learned to avoid that. Those are really like practical things I've been able to do. Beyond that, my wife and I, and she really runs the nutrition side of our lives. She makes sure we're eating properly, we're eating right. And then we both exercise and we hold each other accountable to that. So 5 days a week, I have a trainer, and it's like right down the street from where I'm at. And so I have an hour workout Monday through Friday, and I do it right in the middle of my day because it helps me stay mentally clear when I'm doing this type of thing. So from the kind of to give like a highlight of all that stuff, for me, it's boundaries with my technology, with my screens. It's making sure I'm eating and drinking the right stuff, and then making sure I'm exercising regularly. That stuff right there builds a really good foundation. And then every evening, my wife and I, we're both extroverts. We love hanging out with people. So we try to make sure, like, not overly full, but we try to make sure we have opportunities to hang out with people. So We spend time with people most of the time, and most of our friends we don't have any kids, but most of our friends have young kids. So what we do is we typically pick up dinner, take it over to those families because it's hard for them to get out of the house, and we'll just go like have dinner with them, hang out for a little bit, and then we'll leave. We'll come home, and that's kind of like our rhythm in life and our flow, and we really love it. It's a lot of fun.
Wow. Oh my gosh. When I think about, the things that make us fulfilled and joyous and happy, whether it's, learning and creating is part of it, love and connection is another part of it, and then giving back and contributing. And you have all three of those in spades, and you work at it. And so I just thank you, so much. I can't wait to come over for dinner now that I know that you're inviting my wife and I to hang out, because if success leaves clues, I think there's a lot of clues that are going here, and you are being tremendously blessed. What didn't we talk about that you want to make sure that is our audience gets to hear?
Yeah. I mentioned core values a couple times. I mentioned lead with value, seek to serve, and I slipped another one in there, which was honor others, which is what I always want to do. But the last one, and it's actually my top core value, is to love first. Love first. And for me, I had this really hit me hard, and this was about 6 months ago, but I was really stressed with my work this particular week. It was nearing the end of the week. I believe it was like a Thursday afternoon. And man, I'm not one to get stressed easily, but I was really stressed out about something. I was struggling. I couldn't figure out how to solve a problem for our members. And I was really getting the top of this thing. And Alicia, my wife, walks in. She's like, "Hey," she's like, "You okay?" I'm like, "Man, I really want to serve our members here. Like, I really want to serve them with this. We got to figure it out. I'm not serving them well today. I just can't seem to figure it out." And she reminded me, she goes, "You know what's so much more important than serving people? It's loving them." And I let her walk out of the room before I kind of dropped my knees and started crying. But it was one of those moments where like I knew what she said was right, and it immediately like alleviated all the stress and pressure that I had. And man, I remember I'm like, you know what? It's right. You got to love first. Love is the first thing. And so for me, I'm like, my heart is right. I'm struggling. I'm not doing a great job, but you know what? My heart's with loving people. And so I do my best to do that in my work with my wife, and then also with our friendships. And so I just want to remind everybody, if you're a business owner, an online creator, whatever you might be, at the end of the day, remember that love has to be the center of it, because that's how you really, that in my mind is how you truly live boldly and with a purpose. It's got to have love at the center of it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can serve people well without loving them, because then there's something behind it that I'm doing this for. I'm serving you so I can get something back, or I'm serving them so that I can, do more in my career, or I'm serving because somebody says I have to. But if you truly love them, you're serving them just because of that, because that's what God tells us to do. Oh my gosh, what an incredible way to end our time together. I can't wait. We got to talk again, because there is not enough time for us to be able to have these conversations, but it has been such a delight to have you. Thank you for allowing me and you to connect and to be able to talk to each other. And the platform, for those of you who are watching, is amazing. If you haven't got onto it yet, it's something that you need to do. If you need my help to help you, or his help, we're going to get you on there, because it is so worth being able to improve yourself, and one of the best ways that I know in order to do it. And so go ahead and subscribe, hit the notification, all those things that we do. And we'll try to bring you more just incredible guests as we progress. I want you not to forget that you, my friend, are God's greatest gift. He loves you if you allow him to. Alex, thank you again for being on, and we will talk to you on the next one. Don't go away, Alex, and we'll talk to everybody else later.